Good Friday morning, everyone, and thank you for tuning in to the weekly Friday edition of the Alan Fitz Podcast, aka The Chat, live from our studios here in Amarillo, Texas. My name is Alan Fitz. I'm the host for the program this morning, and welcome into the show. Folks, you've heard me on many of my podcasts talk about the baby boomers. You've also heard me talk about how us as a people live in a different generation of time. And on the program, ladies and gentlemen, this morning I'm going to explain to you in great detail exactly what I mean when I keep continually saying we live in this new generation of time. A lot of you have probably wondered, where am I coming up with this? How can this be actually happening in this day and time? And I wanted to dedicate the show this morning just to that subject. So, with that being said, and without further ado, let's get started with the chat this morning. I'm going to talk about the baby boomers. Now, I'm a baby boomer. People born in the 1960s. The term baby boomer actually got started with the Social Security Administration talking about that people had to wait 2 extra years. You know, if you go back in time, most of your retired years, you could start drawing your Social Security retirement or whatever it was called then when you reached age 65. Now the baby boomers have had to advance that 2 years, according to SSA, to age 67. But we're not talking about Social Security. We're not talking about Social Security retirement. We're talking about the baby boomer time. This is people that were born in the 1960s, such as myself. Now, when I use the term baby boomers, I want you folks to remember that we're talking about also a different generation of time than what we are in today. And I'm going to break it down on the show, and I'm going to explain to you, yes, we are actually living in a different generation of time. Let's start back about 50 plus years ago, when times were much simpler. We're talking about the 1970s. You know, the bicentennial year, everybody remembers that from the baby boomer era. And to bring up a few more things that most of us baby boomers can remember back in that generation of time. The 1968 assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. Elvis Presley's death in 1977. And let's even back it up. 3 years prior to that is when President Gerald Ford got on national television and announced a full and unconditional pardon of President then Richard Nixon, who, well, if you remember, resigned from office. You know, he was the only president in the United States of America history to resign the office of president among the Watergate scandal. And just things of that nature. You know, you had the really good music. The best music in that time era came out. The Bee Gees, Barry Manilow, Sylvia, just to name a few of those great artists out there. It was a great time, and it also was a more laid back and relaxed time than this generation is today to give you a hard, and I do mean a very hard example of how we live in a different generation of time. I'm going to start back about 50-something years ago. We're going to go back in the 1970s. How many of you grew up riding school bus? Now, before I get into this, folks, I want you to understand, you need to listen to all of this, because when I get to this generation of time, I'm going to point the finger at you. Even myself. It's our fault why times have changed. Yes, you heard me correctly, ladies and gentlemen. It is our fault, especially on the discipline end of things. And I'm going to explain why it's our fault. Remember back, as I said earlier, when you rode the school bus to school. You were starting elementary school, and the school bus would pick you up in the dark, and you would travel dirt roads, and the school bus driver would grind the gears, because school buses hadn't become automatic then. No one had invented the automatic shift school bus, so they were standard school buses. And remember how aggressive the school bus driver was, and even the school bus driver themselves. Back in that generation of time, you knew better than to cut up on the school bus. Because if you did, well, back in that era of time, folks, is a lot different than this era. That school bus driver would pull that school bus over on the side of the road, maybe jerk you up by your collar of your shirt, drag you off that school bus, paddle you, break off a peach tree limb, whatever he or she could find to just bust your butt at that given time, because you were cutting up on the school bus. Well, when you got to school, the school bus driver would report you to your local principal, so to speak. The principal would have a talk with you and possibly may even give you a lick or two with a board that had holes drilled in it for the wind to pass through. You got into it at school, you said something you wasn't supposed to say, or you just plainly got in trouble. Yeah, you got your butt tore up in school, but then you had to deal with your parents when you got home. And depending on which parent got there first would determine the severity of the discipline. You know, the moms out there, yeah, they'd turn you around and they'd pop you a couple of times with their hand on the buttocks. But Daddy, how many of you remember Daddy out there? He was a lot more severe with the punishment. He would literally take his belt off to you. And when he got done with you, yeah, you would definitely know it. Times back then were more respectful than they are this day and time. To take you back 50-something years to that, what I keep saying, folks, the baby boomer time, it was a lot easier back then than it is today. But we're going to stay in the past for right now. And we're going to talk about how much easier it was compared to today's time. And I'm going to get parents and children involved in this conversation as we go along with the program. A lot of people out there may be asking themselves, well, was it safer back then than it is today? Well, ladies and gentlemen, where no one really knows the answer to that question, let me point something out that happened back in that time era versus our present day time era. Children were basically allowed to do what they wanted to do, so to speak. Parents would, well, maybe after you did your homework, your science studies, your math studies, your social studies, whatever the case may have been that the teacher sent to you to do as your homework, your parents would double check your homework. And then they would allow you maybe to go out and drive your Swin bicycle, or maybe go over to a friend's house, or even maybe have a friend come to your house. Sleepovers back in that time era were popular, especially with the girls. They would have 2 or 3 of their friends come over and maybe have a pillow party, smashing and busting each other upside the head with soft pillows, things of that nature. You know, the good times. You had the dramatic hairstyles, the natural hairstyles back in that era. A lot of the young ladies had the big full-fledged hair that a lot of you can go back in your yearbooks and can remember from that time era. Then when the young ladies got up old enough, as Mama and Daddy would say, to date, then that process began. And it was, folks, basically it was clean, good times. Everybody had good times. And I quote those 2 words because that's how simple life actually was 50, 60 years ago as I speak today. So yes, going back to that time era when parents would let children go out and ride their bicycles unsupervised, maybe go to the skating rink, maybe go to the bowling alley, versus today, while there is no definite set answer, is it safer? I would have to say, in my own opinion, yes it was, versus what we live in today. So, ladies and gentlemen, this kind of gives you an idea of what life was back in that time era. Now, for you folks listening that were not born then, trust me when I tell you, life was much more easier than complicated life is today. Now, we're going to fast forward and we're going to come up to the year 2025. And I'm going to explain to you why it is not the same and why we do live in a different generation of time. First of all, the new generation is the new generation of life. Now, we all know that when you're born, you have parents, you have grandparents, and if you're lucky enough, you have great-grandparents. And as time goes on, they pass on, and then the ticker time finally comes to you. So, what is the problem with today? Folks, the problem is, and I mentioned this at the beginning of the program, that it's our fault. And no matter what you think, no matter what you believe, I'm here to tell you right now, I will not be silenced on the chat. I will not be silenced on the Alan Fitz podcast. I'm going to tell you exactly what is wrong with today's society. And yes, it is our fault. Remember just a few minutes ago that I had mentioned that if you cut up on a school bus, that the school bus driver would get aggressive with you and would discipline you, him or herself, depending on if it was a male or female school bus driver. Where the fault lies is with you and I, the listeners to this program this morning. It is our fault that our kids act the way they do today. A lot of you are saying, well, how is it our fault? Well, I'm going to explain to you, break it down, how it is our fault. We are the people that vote in this country. We have the freedom to vote people to represent us, to lead us in capacity of life. It is our fault, and I'm pointing the finger at myself too, because I'm just as much as at blame as you are. But getting to the point of where it's our fault in discipline of our children is because we voted to put people in Austin to represent us here in the Great Lone Star that have passed legislation that basically prevents children from being disciplined in today's society. Now let's back up 50, 55 years, if you will, folks. You cut up, you smart-mouthed or sassed your mama, she'd slap you in the face, okay? Today's society, a parent can't do that because they would be charged with a felony. Domestic violence is what they call it here in Texas. So, where does that fault lie? It lies with us as a population of voters in Texas. You know, they always say that if you don't like what's going on, go to the polls in 4 years and vote them out. Put somebody else in there that maybe knows what they're doing. Well, the problem is, and what a lot of people did not understand, is that we were voting people into office that were a bunch of idiots that went to Austin to change the laws and give the schools more authority to do what they want to do. This is what we did not realize as a population in general that we were doing. And I'm not criticizing anybody. You didn't know what you were doing, okay, folks? You did not know what you were doing. We did not know what we were doing when we were doing this. I'm not trying to offend anybody by what I'm about to say, but in my opinion, and this is only my opinion, one man's opinion versus the rest of the world. In my opinion, we still have a bunch of ramrod idiots in the state capital of Austin to represent us. Getting back to the discipline part, the idiots that we elected that changed legislation made it to the point to where if a child acts up in school, the parent can send a written notice to the school and they cannot discipline that child. That is the law in this state. They have also got to the point that even the parent themselves can face criminal charges for over punishing their children. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the new generation of time that we live in. Going back again to the 1970s, let's back up 50 years ago, ladies and gentlemen. There was no such thing that was called the internet. There was no such thing that was called the cell phone as it is known today. There is no such thing then as it was known today as social media. None of this stuff, folks, had been created yet. You got the word of mouth out by your own mouth. This is how life was meant to be in that time era. Now you fast forward 50, 55 years, now you have a way that people misuse the system. They misuse the internet. Okay, so break it down, back up 50, and let's advance to 50. And this is where we sit in this new generation of time. How many of you out there have gotten on the internet? And it was very, very popular back then when they had Yahoo Chat. Yahoo Messenger came out, and they had Yahoo Chat, and then the chat rooms began up. And people would get into chat rooms and try to meet people, try to communicate with people, try to do this, try to do that. Then the bot programs were written. And you really didn't know who you were talking to back then, versus in the 1970s. If you picked up the old non-existent now rotary dial telephone and just talked to somebody. No, the rotary dial telephone disappeared. Okay, the only time you're going to see a rotary dial telephone if you watch an old episode of Adam 12 or maybe Perry Mason on TV Land. So cell phones became very prevalent as we advanced into time. But you also had the internet that was involved in this. So people would get into chat rooms. Yeah, the horror stories began, folks. People would meet people. People would get killed. People would get married. People would get divorced. It was all a result of two words: social media. There was no such thing as social media back in the baby boomer area. Your social media, ladies and gentlemen, was driving to the local Dairy Queen and conversing with your friends. Now, some may have been positive and some may have been negative about this. Most of the girls back in that time era would just gather up to Dairy Queen and maybe talk about who they were dating or talk about what they were going to do in the band or trying to make a cheerleader, twirler, whatever it may be, where the guys were a little bit more on the defensive side of things, and they were hanging around looking at the girls drinking beer. Well, some got caught and some didn't. We're getting a little bit off subject here. But to go back in today's society, it's basically social media, folks. Social media is the downfall of today's society. The younger generation, and I'm not saying that adults are not doing this, but the younger generation seems to think that the only thing that revolves in life is social media. Getting on social media platforms. I'm not going to name any in Pacific because there's so many to name, but they're abusing social media. Social media, when it was first created, it was a wonderful thing. Windows 95, the old bulky square computer monitors that came out when that Yahoo Chat Messenger mess got started. People were pretty fascinated by how the computers could talk to each other from 1,000 miles away to around the world. And then technology got better, but then the new generation was born on planet Earth. Folks, I hate to admit this, but I have actually physically witnessed children, young age children, that will be shopping maybe in a local Walmart store. Not just here in Amarillo, anywhere. I'm not going to say where this is at because I don't even remember myself. And the child wanted something as the parent, especially the mother, was beginning to enter the checkout line to scan her items and to pay for her goods and go about her business. And the child wanted something and the mother said no. What did the child do? The child turned around. That's fine, bitch. Yeah, you know exactly what I'm talking about, ladies and gentlemen. If you'd have done that back in the 1970s, you wouldn't have had any teeth left in your mouth. What did the parent do when the child called her the B word? She just laughed at her. Why is this happening, folks? I'm going to tell you why it's happening. It's because of social media. Now, you can believe me or not believe me. That is your choice, and that is what this great country is all about. But if you stop and think about this, it may make more sense to you in the next couple of hours after this broadcast is over than it will make sense to you while you're listening to this podcast. Before social media came about, on the platforms, people were able to download the apps. You did not see the problems that you are seeing in today's society right now versus when social media came about. What caused this to happen? Well, folks, I'm going to tell you exactly what caused it to happen. People began using social media for the purpose that it was not intended for. For example, and it's actually been held recently about the Charlie Kirk assassination. Now, just in my opinion, Charlie Kirk was not who you think he was. Charlie Kirk was basically a fraud. And I will not be silenced on these comments, okay? And whoever wants to come after me for saying that, more power to you. You're not going to silence me on what I have to say because it's known as freedom of speech. We talked about this last week on the podcast. But I'm not going to get into the Charlie Kirk drama again. And that's all this is this country is creating drama over his assassination. You folks really need to find something else to talk about, okay? Because that is nothing but a bunch of MAGA drama that has been created. Getting back on subject, people began using social media for the passage of negativity, okay? And it became noticed by especially people that get on social media and do nothing but troll the internet. These are nothing more than trolls, and it's a troll with a capital T. The younger generation began noticing that these people were saying whatever they wanted to say. And because they're sitting behind a monitor and a keyboard with a mouse in their hand, are suffering no repercussions by what they're doing. It became evident to the trolls that, hey, I've got something to say. It don't matter whether anybody likes it or not. I'm going to say it. And it became a pattern of behavior with social media. Every time something happens, people have got to flock to social media to express their disdainment for something. Yeah, there's a lot of positive out there, ladies and gentlemen, that people do talk about. But unfortunately, on social media, the bad outweighs the good. And this is one of the main reasons, folks, that children in this generation act the way they do. Before social media really got pumped up, how many of you remember the boom, 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 all the loud music and the vibrating back windshields and the overly decorated hubcaps on Buicks and Pontiacs? What was this all about? Well, this, folks, was part of the new generation of time. You still see this from time to time, and especially folks wearing baggy jeans or baggy pants exposing the top of the butt crack. Why do they do this? This is what some people say is to draw attention to themselves, while others say it's an expression of freedom of speech. Both, ladies and gentlemen, are accurate descriptions. Social media at that point became more widespread. More apps were being created. More platforms were being created. And more people were being born in this country. So, the point I'm trying to make with the new generation of time is, why are the younger generation of this time era acting out of disrespect and spitefulness to our society? The answer to that question should be right before you. But for some of you that may not get the answer to this, I'm going to explain it to you in the blink of an eye. It's called social media. People are allowing their children to get on social media, say whatever in the hell they want to say, get away with what they're saying, and then it reflects back off to them when they go to school, after they graduate school. Folks, they're already in a pattern. Ladies and gentlemen, listen to me. They're already in the pattern of negativity. So they express their negativity in everyday life because they had no discipline in the first place when they first started engaging negatively into social media. The parents wouldn't discipline. The schools couldn't discipline. Again, those idiots that we elected to go to Austin to represent us have changed everything. People are allowed to do more today than they've ever been allowed to do, especially 50 years prior to now. You know, your parents kind of had their hand on you back in those days. Today, the hand is not there because of the threat of jail confinement, penitentiary confinement, things of that nature. Then you may ask yourself, well, it's not just all the children, Alan, is acting like this. What about the adults that get on social media and act the way they act? Well, a lot of this is retroactive, folks. They see their kids do it. Well, they start believing their child is not doing anything wrong, so they start doing it themselves. Now, you have certain people out there that use social media and continue to use social media to disparage people, but they're not gaining any traction with it. Why are they not gaining traction? Because a lot of people can see the transparency into social media. will admit to you that I've been plagued by social media in the past, but it hasn't changed who I am, and it hasn't stopped anything that I continue to do. For example, these podcasts. Again, I'm not going to be silenced. I'm going to say what I have to say, and I'm going to say my beliefs. And social media can ramble on all it wants. It's not going to stop me from doing what I choose to do. And it shouldn't stop you folks. But like I said earlier, the population of today's time era seems to get their kicks not on Route 66 like we have here in Amarillo, but they get their kicks on social media. For an example, let me go back in time to a couple of weeks ago. Joe Buck, the Fox Sports commentator, made a comment about one of the football players, and I'm not going to get into this because I don't want to give anybody the ideas to the exact details and then say, well, such and such said this about Joe Buck. Joe Buck gets on Fox Sports. He's live on television. He talked about one of the players. Well, the fans, it was those people sitting at home. He's, everybody knows who Joe Buck is. He's a commentator alongside Troy Aikman on Fox Sports. What did people do? I'm going to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, exactly what they did. Lead this by example, okay? And this will shape up the entire circle of where I'm going with this. Because the fans out there did not like what Joe Buck had to say about this professional NFL football player during the game, people could not reach Joe Buck directly. So what do? They go lash out on social media, all the different platforms they have. Same way with me. Folks may not like what I have to say, and you know what? That's okay, because there's people out there that do like what I have to say, and there's folks out there that do like to listen to what I have to say. So, no disrespect to anyone. I could care less if you don't like it or not. But the same principle goes that they can't directly contact me either. What do? They go lash out on social media. President Donald Trump, when he first got into his second term as a lame duck president this past January, he began levying tariffs on different countries and shot the price of eggs up over $10 a dozen. Because people could not directly contact Mr. Trump, what did? They go to social media. This is where the good of this country outweighs the bad, ladies and gentlemen. The good can see right through the people that get on social media with their negative comments and commentary against every little thing. It doesn't matter if somebody does something good. Certain type people are going to find something negative about it, and they're going to go jump on social media. Then you have the trolls. Everything is negative, and they're going to eat up social media and just burn it up. They're going to blow up social media because as a society, we have the right to speak our mind. It is called freedom of speech. As long as we're not making threats to someone, we have the right to speak as we feel. This is the capitalization of social media. It is because we, the people, cannot speak out. We cannot reach the person doing things that they disapprove of. For example, President Donald Trump. They don't like what he's doing They cannot directly contact him, so they ramble on social media. They light up everything on social media because, well, let's put it to you this way, folks. Let me give you an example to this. On some, and we'll use Facebook for a moment. A lot of people on Facebook will block their page from receiving comments. Now, why do people do this? Well, two things come to mind because I've actually done it and I still do it. Two things come to mind when someone doesn't want comments posted by other people. And this is going to stay with me for just a minute because this is going to get me back to my point in frame, if you will. The two things that come to mind is, number one, the reason that they're blocking comments from coming to their page is because they probably don't want to see any comments. They could care less what anybody else has to say. Or the second thing that comes to mind, folks, is that if they allow the comments, then you're going to have the trolls get on the page. You're going to have threads that get started and the chaos begins. So they're trying to eliminate that by blocking the comments. The point I'm trying to make is social media is one-sided. That is the problem with social media. When someone says something that we don't agree with, and we can't physically voice our opinion, whether it be on that person's social media page directly, email, calling them up on the telephone, it stresses the individual out. So the only alternative that the person has is to reach out in a negative way through social media. Now you understand the new generation of time that we live in. Again, I want to say that 50 years ago, 60 years ago, ladies and gentlemen, we didn't have, quote unquote, social media. We didn't have carry-on board cell phones. When cell phones first came out, you'll probably remember they were in luxurious cars with people that had a lot of money, but they were corded. A little antenna on the rooftop of that vehicle. Maybe in some cases, folks had them glued on to the back windshield because maybe they had a convertible or something of that nature. But the generation of time was much different than the generation of time we live in today. And that is because of two words: social media. I guess when you look back into my growing up time, and maybe yours too, if you were born back in that time era, you can understand where I have led you to be today in truth of how indeed we do live in a different generation of time. Computer technology, the changing of legislation, which again, folks, that's our fault for voting those idiots in and not getting them back out quick enough. And the explosion, if you will, of birth in this country, beefed up and married together with the negativity of social media, truly is the reason that there is the capulating problem with children acting the way they do in this country today. Elementary students completely out of control on school buses. And then they want to know, school districts, let me touch on this for just a second, because I do work for a school district, a brand new one, I should add. And I will tell you that growing up and riding the school bus to school as an elementary student, times are much, much different than they are in today's time. Elementary students are completely out of control. They use language that should not be used, not just only on school buses, but out in general public, dropping F-bombs and things of that nature. Where is the problem with this, folks? The problem lies with the parent. Discipline begins at home. No matter what you think, discipline begins at home. And because I do work for a school district, I am prohibited from releasing information of my employer because it could jeopardize my employment speaking the way I'm speaking now. But I will tell you that yes, what you hear on the news is true. There is a serious school bus shortage, not just here in Texas, ladies and gentlemen, but everywhere in the United States. And why is that, folks? Why do we have a school bus shortage? It's because of the way kids act. It is their exposure to negative social media. There is nothing, folks, positive about social media at all. I hate to be the one to tell you that, but there is nothing positive about social media. Not in this day and time. It's all negative. Then the parents turn around and expose their children to social media. And a lot of this is adults as well. So we can't just all just point the finger, folks, at the kids. We've also got to point it at ourselves. Some people out there have nothing better else to do but to get on social media and stalk folks, troll folks, harass folks, constant negativity. They have nothing positive to say because I'm going to tell you why. They have no self-esteem, ladies and gentlemen. These are the lowest type of individuals you can associate yourself with. People that get on social media and make disparaging comments against other people because they can't reach them directly have very low self-esteem. That is what is wrong with this new generation of time that we live in, folks. Low self-esteem. The non-discipline at home from the parents. The law doesn't say that you can't discipline your parents. The law says you can't abuse or assault your children. And it basically falls under abuse. You cannot abuse your children in the process of discipline. How, as a people, do we change the society that we live in that invokes itself to trolling and making negative remarks on social media? Well, I'm here to tell you right now, that's not going to happen. The old saying is, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. Well, that's what's going on today, ladies and gentlemen, is we have led ourselves on a negative journey along social media. We let our children say whatever they want to say. We let our children act out any way they want to act. And we're seeing the fruits of the labor of non-discipline in this country. And folks, it's not just here in the good old red, white, and blue. It's everywhere that social media prevails. And again, and I'll say this one more time, so listen to me very closely, ladies and gentlemen. People that do not agree with what someone has said do not have the tenacity, if you will, to reach out directly to them. Pick up the telephone and call them. Send them an email. No, they don't want to do that. These are people that hide behind computers. And because they cannot reach out to said individual or individuals that they have said something that they don't like, or it's not a social norm, so to speak, they're going to light them up on social media. It's called low self-esteem, ladies and gentlemen. This is what dictates us as a people today. Going back 50 years ago, you didn't have all this technology mess that you have today. And you fast forward up to the year 2025, you have a social media mess. Not everyone out there, folks, is a bad person. People that choose to be bad, they're bad people. But everyone is created equal, and everyone has the right to choose how they live life. Whether it be here in the United States, whether it be in Canada, Mexico, New Zealand, Tibet, even down in the South Pole in Antarctica, if they live there. They have the right to choose the way they live. If they know right from wrong and discipline was applied to them in their earlier years, then yes, they should be able to lead a productive life. But again, social media is the condemnation of this country. You know, before I close the show out this afternoon, I want to bring a point up that a lot of you may not know about. September the 1st of this year, a Senate bill went into effect that prohibits students from using their cell phones during instructional periods. It's actually written from the time the bell rings in the morning until the final bell in the evening, late afternoon, if you will. Our own Texas State Representative right here in Amarillo, Caroline Fairley, introduced this bill into legislation. And the schools across the state are implementing different procedures. Some schools will seize the phones when the student enters the school. Other students must keep the cell phones in their backpacks, the tablets, whatever. But they're not allowed to use their cell phones in schools because what are they doing, folks? They're going to social media, and it's disrupting their education. It's disrupting their educational time. As a school bus driver, I see one thing that happens every afternoon when students get on my bus. Cell phones in hand, going to social media, checking email, and then boy, them thumbs and fingers are working to send those text messages because they haven't been able to do that during the day. Social media has become a part of life. The negativity will continue. Folks, brace yourself because it's only going to get worse before it gets better. Schools here in Texas are trying to put a dent into this because even the school districts across the state, ladies and gentlemen, they know about all the negativity that goes on social media. Getting back to those elementary students, a lot of them are wild when they get on the bus. Of course, they don't do that on my bus. I got control of that very quickly. But if you have a child out there and you're having discipline problems, I strongly suggest that you get your child away from the negativity of social media and educate your children that they can live much better and communicate with folks other than those that spread negativity on social media. Again, and you have to remember, these people have very low self-esteem. They have nothing else better to do with life. And if you go back 50 years and then blink your eye and you're 50, 55 years ahead, you can truly now understand why we have a problem in this country. It's social media as we live in a different generation of time. Folks, that's going to wrap it up for this Friday edition of the chat. It has been a pleasure to come to you once again and to share my thoughts and my views on things. And I hope that this program will shed light on exactly why we do live in a different generation of time. I'll be back next Friday with yet another edition of the Alan Fitz Podcast. Until then, and as always, from right here in Amarillo, Texas, have a great weekend. Bye for now.